Good morning. My name is Emmanuel Awen from Investigation and Monitoring Department, NAPTIP.
Good morning, all. My name is Ali Onuwaje Felix. I'm of the Public Enlightenment Department of NAPTIP.
Good morning, all. My name is Mark Kennedy, Protocol.
Good morning. My name is Akeju Oluwafemi Daniel, Public Enlightenment, NAPTIP.
Good morning. My name is Buka Isokariari. I'm a prosecutor with NAPTIP.
Good morning, all. My name is Adu Tenimu Laboran. I'm a counselor from Counseling and Rehabilitation Department.
Good morning, everybody. Gavi Odengi Festus is my name. I'm with Investigation and Monitoring Department, Makodi Zonal Command. Thank you.
Oloja Hilary Abba, Administration Unit, Enugu Command.
Good morning, all. My name is Balagarba Ali from Admin Department, Maiduguri Command.
Good morning, all. My name is Ibrahim Steven, Admin, NAPTIP.
Hello, good morning. My name is Ben Esang. I'm a head of Public Enlightenment, Uyo Zonal Command.
Good morning, all. My name is Hyacinth Okafor. I'm an investigator.
Good morning. My name is Sadiq Abubakar Atiku from Counseling and Rehabilitation Department, NAPTIP.
Good morning, all. My name is Gloria Bai. I'm in the Intelligence and International Cooperation Unit of NAPTIP at the headquarters. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Malakai Ekete from Research and Program Department, NAPTIP.
My name is Chukwili Gano from Public Enlightenment, NAPTIP.
Good morning. My name is Nurat Lawal from Intelligence and International Cooperation Unit.
Good morning. My name is Mrs. Ebe Longbufo, CNR Department, that's Counseling and Rehabilitation Department, NAPTIP.
Morning, all. I am Gladys Ogochukwu Ani from Counseling and Rehabilitation Department, NAPTIP headquarters.
Good morning. My name is Akim Bello, an investigator with NAPTIP.
Good morning. My name is Rose Bassi from Counseling and Rehabilitation Department, NAPTIP.
Good morning. My name is Samuel Okoroji. I work with Research and Programs Development, NAPTIP.
Good morning, all. My name is Salman Rabiat. I'm of Reform Unit, NAPTIP headquarters.
Good morning, all. My name is Desmond Garba of the Training and Manpower Development Department, NAPTIP.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Olubi Olusayo, Training and Manpower Development Department, NAPTIP headquarters. There are some people there that, okay.
Good morning, all. My name is Shehu Labaran Usman from Intelligence and International Cooperation Unit, NAPTIP.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nusa Maman Ode. I'm of the Administrative Unit from the Benin Zonal Command.
Morning, everyone. Ellen Idoko is my name from Audit Unit.
Good morning. I'm Ibrahim Mohammed Mahmoud, F&A, NAPTIP, Abuja.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Oloyede Sunday of the Finance and Accounts Department.
Good morning, all. My name is Ologun Agba Adeyemi David from Finance and Account Department, NAPTIP.
Good morning, all. My name is Akinlade Justina from Investigation and Monitoring Department, NAPTIP.
My name is Kelly Davis from Finance and Accounts Department, NAPTIP.
Good morning. My name is Olga Godwin, DG Office, NAPTIP headquarters.
Good morning, sir. My name is Felicia Lami Ono from the DG's office, procurement. Thank you.
Good morning, all. My name is Hakim Olatunde Lawal, Investigation and Monitoring Department, NAPTIP.
Did anybody not have an opportunity to introduce themselves, please? Thank you.
Good morning, all. My name is Saadatu Galadima from the Training and Manpower Development Department. Thank you.
My name is Ebele Chigweneda. I'm a partner with Puduka Attorneys and Solicitors. I'm the moderator from yesterday. And I thank God we are all here. And to get us started, can we have a volunteer for an opening prayer quickly? A volunteer? A volunteer? Are we getting any volunteer for opening prayer? Okay, let us pray in Jesus. Is there any volunteer? Okay.
In Jesus' name, our dear Heavenly Father, we want to appreciate you for your faithfulness. We thank you for gathering us here once more. As we are here this day, we ask that, Lord, all that we are going to be deliberating upon, we ask that, Lord, you come and lead and direct us. In Jesus' mighty name we pray.
Good morning. Could do a little better. Good morning. Okay. It's much, much better. So thank you all for coming together this morning. I think we have a great training program to go through. You have the materials. And Bella's right. This is what you make it. This is training, but it's really an exchange of information. And so first I just want to thank the DG and NAPTIP because you guys are members of a very premier organization. Nigeria is doing it the right way. You guys are focused. You have good results. And so the idea is to get better and to add to that success. And so today, there's a number of tools we are blessed to have in our presence experts in the area. You have Amanda, you have Rich, and you have Anthony from the U.S. And I think we ought to give them a round of applause because it's not right around the corner. So we thank you guys in advance for the training. And then I want to give, even though she's not here, I want to give the GG a round of applause for her leadership. I'm not going to take up too much time, but I do want to say that this issue, human trafficking, is one of the most serious issues that we face as a society, right? It cuts through the very fabric of who we are as human beings. The notion that we have individuals who would enslave other individuals, sell their bodies, use them for labor without wages, the abuse that goes on with women, men, and children is a huge challenge to us as a society, and it's global. And you folks are on the forefront of that and trying to stop that. So it really is, I always say you're working on the side of angels. So as you approach this training, what I will ask you to do, how many folks in here are lawyers? Lawyers, raise your hands, please. Don't be ashamed. It's okay. Okay. Investigators? Okay. So in each one of your capacities, you're advocates, whether you're a lawyer or you're an investigator, particularly in this space. And so I ask you to keep in mind the goal. Keep in mind that your call to service is about the victim. It's about bringing about justice, but more importantly, it's about taking someone who is broken and trying to put them back together and make them whole again. And that's an extremely, extremely important and extremely powerful position to be in, and you shouldn't take it lightly. So as you go through the materials today, get involved, figure out, ask questions, share best practices, and remember what you're doing and why you're here, right? You're trying to build capacity, you're trying to improve your skills, you're trying to get tips and ideas for one purpose and one purpose only. And that is to lend the voice to the voiceless, right? Protect the least among us. That's our call to duty. So again, thank you. I'm sorry I have to run off. I have to get back to the U.S. for a meeting, but I wanted to say good morning, welcome, thank you for coming, and let's have a good day.
Thank you so much for taking out the time to come. He has a flight to catch now, so he has to leave. Have a safe flight back, sir. And we go on into the presentations immediately. And to take us for the first presentation is Ms. Amanda Plisner. Please, a round of applause as she comes.
Good morning, everybody. I'm glad to see that we haven't scared everybody off. You've all come back for a second day and hopefully for a third tomorrow. My hope is to, like several other people have already mentioned, to make this an interactive day. I don't want to bore anybody. And I want to try to learn from you and to learn how I can best reach whatever the case may be. My intention is to spend my time with you today laying a foundation, making sure we're all on the same page about the basics of human trafficking. What is the law? What are we looking for? Making sure that everyone feels that they're prepared to recognize human trafficking when they see it. And then tomorrow to take a little bit of a deeper dive and to take the discussion more in the direction of building the case. So we'll lay the foundation today and take it to the courtroom tomorrow. Hopefully that sounds good to everyone, and we'll get started. Okay, so I'm sure most of you, after hearing who all of you are through your introductions, are familiar with the laws that are guiding your human trafficking work here in Nigeria. But I wanted to, I also know the law was relatively new, so I wanted to make sure that everybody's on the same page about what laws it is that we're talking about. And I also wanted, for the purposes of our exchange of information, to point out some similarities between the United States laws and Nigerian laws. So we're working from, we're working from the Trafficking Persons, the Act from 2015 that was passed. So the importation and exportation of persons. If you'll remember from yesterday, and I'll put the slide up again in a minute, that flow chart, the means, in the method. Yeah, okay, so we're all on the same page there. So I've gone ahead and pointed out which words, the language from each of these statutes is going to tick off those boxes. So the importing and exporting of persons using deception or coercion, inducing a minor to move from one place to another, keeping, detaining, or harboring another person. So those are going to be, when you're conducting your investigation, those are going to be the things that you're looking for, the elements that you need to meet, and that you need facts to support in order to get your case off the ground. Oh, and I should mention, I see a lot of you taking notes, which is great. Feel free to take notes, but I will make this available to you after the training, so certainly don't feel the need to write everything down. I'm just as happy to have you engage, ask questions, and I'll make sure that you get these slides for your reference moving forward. Okay, same thing here, just really quickly running through the laws. Procuring or recruiting, and then of course these are people under 18, so that's another element. And then the harboring a person under 18 in a brothel. Buying, selling, or hiring. So there's your action there. And then the subjected to exploitation. And then with the forced labor, requiring, recruiting, transporting, harboring, receiving, hiring out. There you've got your actions. And then employment of a child as a domestic worker, which we heard a lot about yesterday. Just, it's a strict liability, can't do it, period. So how do those laws, which you're all familiar with, compare to the laws that we're working with in the United States? In the United States, there are federal human trafficking laws, and then there are state human trafficking laws. As a prosecutor with the State Department of Justice, I use the state human trafficking laws. I have colleagues at the United States Attorney's Office who are also prosecutors who will prosecute human trafficking cases under the federal laws, but they both apply. So when somebody, a trafficker is trafficking victims in the United States, they are potentially subject to penalty under either the federal statutes or the state statutes. In terms of why we would decide one way or the other, in certain instances, the federal statutes may carry steeper penalties, or the state statutes might carry steeper penalties. So that'll be a charging decision that we make, taking the exposure or the amount of possible prison time into consideration, as well as things like the individual's criminal history and how that would impact what kind of prison time they'd be looking at. So this is the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000. That was our federal human trafficking statute. So you'll look here, if you look here, you'll see a lot of the same words that were in your statute. Am I out of the way here? Okay. recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision of, or obtaining. Very similar words, particularly the harboring, recruitment, and then the transportation, the movement in or out, and force, fraud, or coercion. And then this is the California law. We see, again, a lot of the same language as the federal law and also as the Nigerian law, the forced labor services. And if you look down here, the force, fraud, duress, or coercion. This is the part of the federal law that applies to sex trafficking. In the United States, sex trafficking and labor trafficking are separate, separate laws, or separate parts of the law, the same way that they are here in Nigeria. In California, that is. This is, so the law is sex trafficking under federal law, the same thing. So recruitment, harboring, transportation for the purposes of a sex act, force, fraud, coercion. Also here, you'll see the difference between, it's the same act, but different parts of the act for labor trafficking and for sex trafficking. One thing I want to point out, another similarity between California law and Nigerian law is the distinction that's made for minors. So in California, we divide trafficking really into 3 different categories. There's labor trafficking, under which we treat minors and adults the same way. And then there's adult sex trafficking and minor sex trafficking. The reason that is, and I mentioned this yesterday, is because for sex trafficking of a minor, we don't require the force, fraud, fear, or duress. That is replaced by the person being in the age of minority. So, in addition to human trafficking, in the United States, we have several other sexual offenses that are often part of human trafficking cases. Let me ask a question. So, in Nigeria, do you charge, I guess this is for the lawyers room, do you charge cases in the alternative? In other words, will you say this case based on the facts could be crime A or crime B? So I'll charge A and B and see which the judge decides the person should be convicted of? Yeah, you do that. Okay. What do you call that here? What is it? How do you call that? Does it have a name doing it that way? Associated crimes. Okay. So in the United States we would call that, charging cases in the alternative. So for example, in the United States, I'll charge a human trafficking case, but I may also charge pimping because the elements are slightly different. So we have a jury system. So in case the jury finds that maybe one of the elements of trafficking isn't met, they may still find that I've got the pimping. So I just wanted to put these up there again for context. If for example, the force element of the human trafficking charge is a little bit weak in a particular case, I may still get the pimping because we can show that there was commercial sex and that there was the exchange of money much more easily often. And the same thing, pandering, we also use that as a charge in the alternative. Back to the elements, action means purpose, you don't need a reminder, but it's important, so I always throw it up here again to make sure that it's top of mind. Any questions about this? It sounds like everybody has a pretty good understanding of it, but does anybody have any questions about what this means or how it works? Also, as part of the foundation, I wanted to run through some of the statistics. There's an organization in California, the National Human Hotline, I mentioned this yesterday, and they do a wonderful job of collecting statistics that help guide our human trafficking work. So this was from 2017, but only through the first half of the year because the year in its entirety the statistics haven't been compiled in full yet. So in 2017, just in the state of California, this hotline received just over 2,100 calls. And from those calls, identified 705 cases of human trafficking. You see in the bottom, we're looking predominantly in California at sex trafficking. Then, labor trafficking, so 544 cases of sex trafficking versus 95 of labor trafficking. I often get asked, who are the victims in California? So this is just a quick look at that. Predominantly females, you can see here. Predominantly adults, though a fair number of minors. And contrary to what many people think about human trafficking in the United States, the bulk of our human trafficking victims are actually Americans. So this is 2016, so you can get an idea of what it looks like for a full year. 4,100 calls were taken, and from that, 1,300 cases of human trafficking were identified. Again, predominantly sex trafficking, predominantly female, predominantly adults, and predominantly US citizens. So these are the statistics reported by NAPDIP, so you may all be familiar with them, but that I pulled from our US Department of State report. It just gives you some comparison. So it looks like, whereas we're predominantly sex trafficking in California, in Nigeria, there's actually a reasonably good split between sex trafficking and labor trafficking. Has that been your experience here, being the boots on the ground? Do you get the sense that you're looking just as much at labor trafficking as you are at sex trafficking? Yeah, I'm seeing some head nods. Is there anyone who feels like that's not the case? Anybody who sees, much more labor trafficking than sex trafficking, or much more sex trafficking than labor trafficking? So again, some review from yesterday: human trafficking, low risk, high profit. This was just some photos I pulled from a case of mine, because I always find them to be amusing and really offensive. From Facebook, this is a trafficking defendant who flaunted his money that he was earning on Facebook like crazy. You can see just the dollar bill. He's drinking a beer, playing with all of his money that he's earned from trafficking women. And the same thing here. So we're looking not just at his money, but his nice expensive watch and his brand new shiny sneakers that he's earning from trafficking young women. So human trafficking hidden in plain sight. This is, again, from that same organization, a little bit of statistical information on where we're seeing human trafficking in California. Again, from 2016 on the top, and then 2017 on the bottom. I'm sorry, 2017, the first 6 months of 2017 on the top, and then the entire year of 2016 on the bottom. For labor trafficking, in both instances, we're seeing primarily domestic work and then agriculture. Outside of I'm not sure how familiar people are with California. Has anyone been to California before? No, okay, so California is a big, long state, right? And we have large cities in the south and in the north, and then in the central California is largely agricultural. So that's become one of the major areas where we're seeing human trafficking, labor trafficking, specifically in California, due to the tremendous amount of agriculture taking place there, and the fact that these agricultural areas are so far outside of the cities that it's much easier for the trafficking to go undetected, because there's far fewer people in those areas to observe it. And then on the sex trafficking side, we are seeing most of our sex trafficking in either illicit massage or spa businesses. So you'll have what looks like just a massage business, but not a nice one. You know, you can tell from the outside that it looks like someplace you might not want to go, and inside the women appear to give massages, but for the right customers, it's actually not a massage at all. And then the hotel and motel based. In the United States, the trend now is for sex trafficking to take place almost entirely by use of the internet. Has anyone heard of Backpage, a website called Backpage? Okay, so there's a website called Backpage.com that is the #1 place where sex trafficking takes place in the United States and certainly in California. Girls or their traffickers post ads online for them. It'll have their picture, it'll have some information about them, sometimes somebody else's picture, and a phone number. Men who are looking to buy sex go on to Backpage. They look at the ads of people who are in their area. They call the number on the ad. They'll talk either directly to the woman or to her trafficker, and they make an arrangement to meet at a hotel or in a car, and that's where the trafficking takes place. So that's what these statistics are referring to, hotel or motel based, where the trafficker will drive the victim to the hotel to meet the individual who has agreed via the internet, and then via phone to meet her to pay for sex. Any questions about the use of the internet in that way? Because I suspect it's the wave of the future here as well, unfortunately. So glad to have a more elaborate discussion about the use of the internet for trafficking if anyone finds that might be helpful for them. Okay, so we talked about this a bit yesterday, but I wanted to hone in on it because like this, you can tell from the previous slide, if you're talking about domestic work, where are you when you're talking about domestic work? You're inside someone's home, right? So from the outside, if you as an investigator are walking by a home, you can't see that there's trafficking going on inside that home. And the same thing with the hotel or motel-based sex that we have in the United States. When you have sex trafficking here in Nigeria, where is the sex actually taking place? It's hotels and motels here too. Brothels. Okay, also hotels or, yeah. And how does the sex buyer come into contact with the victim? How do they meet? How do they know? How does the sex buyer make contact with the? Okay, so they wait at the hotel and find the men there. Right, so in the case of an agent, how does that work? So you call them on the phone and then they meet at the hotel. Where do you find that phone number? You do have something like Backpage. Okay, great, tell me about that. You set yourself up there, come on. Remind me what your name is? I want to hear what everyone has to say, but let's take it one at a time so that I can make sure I'm getting all the information. Perfect, thank you so much. Tell me a little bit about what I'm describing as Backpage, what that equivalent is here.
Yes, it's done online. The girls have their whenever a customer needs a girl, he calls her number and they meet somewhere.
How does he have her number?
It's online. You have numbers online.
What kind of resource is it online? Is it a website or is it a? You want to pass the?
I know that there is a platform called Badu, something like that. Yeah, I know girls advertise of all ages, and then the men go there and pick. Sometimes not even their real identities, and then yes, they meet up with them in states, wherever.
Okay.
Like someone from Abuja here can meet up a girl in Kaduna. They have that arrangement. Badoo. B-A-D-O-O. It's a site. It's a website.
Yeah. Okay, so the good news and the bad news are the same. The good news is we're on the same page more than I realized. The bad news is we're on the same page more than I realized. So, does someone else want to share? Great.
No, I want to also say that in there, they give some of their specifications and criteria. So from when they go there, they see, and then when you want those criteria, you call or you send your invitation.
Do you want to something
No,
else?
they could also drop their phone numbers, and some ladies are actually in hotels, just like you were saying. They put up an advert. If you're interested, you call them, they're in a hotel, and they could even tell you whether you are ready to prepare to pay for the room. When you go, you pay, and then you get what you want, and that's what they do. That's how they operate it.
Okay, so based on what I'm hearing, my guess is that here in Nigeria, the top venues, so to speak, for human trafficking are probably the same as they are in California. Domestic work, we definitely have here. And then the illicit massage or spa business is essentially a brothel. And the hotel-motel base we've just covered. So hopefully that gives us, this is part of the reason I wanted to go through what seems like this basic information is to establish what we just found, which is that we're really talking about the same thing. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Two other issues I want to raise. So the first is when the girls are providing their phone number, whether it's on that website or on some other way, is it their actual phone number? Is it
That this Badoo website, somebody contacted a girl. I was hearing the experience later, and after the first day they met, and sometimes it's not their number, they just register for that reason, and then you can't reach them again.
What happens is there's these applications on your phone that you can use that create a fake number. So you're using your own phone, but the phone number is not traceable. So do you write search warrants on telephones here? Is there a way to get somebody's telephone information? Okay, so I mention this because that's one of the things that traffickers are doing now to keep us from being able to write those search warrants to get the information off the phones, because they're using these fake numbers. So we'll look at an ad and we'll say, okay, 555-555, that's the phone number. We'll write the search warrant, and the search warrant comes back with no information because that phone number isn't an actual phone number. So there's just something to keep, as time goes on and as traffickers become wiser and use technology. Thing I wanted to highlight for you, if that starts happening and you're wondering, well, that's something to consider. So the problem that we all have with where this trafficking is taking place is that the reactive law enforcement measures that we're typically taking and that law enforcement has taken in every area traditionally simply don't work. that's why we've had such a hard time, or one of the reasons we've had such a hard time getting a grasp on human trafficking. Who was an investigator in this room? I don't remember who. Right there in the front. So, were you ever a police officer who did regular street work, drove around in a police car, and responded to crimes, or looked for criminal activity? Okay. So, how did you find how did you know when a crime was taking place when you were doing that kind of work?
Well, like in Makodi, we had an issue. We are in a garden, you know. So when you see a child, you know, with an adult, and then you know that they are likely going to be abused, you know it. And so we had an incident where we tried to make arrests. And the barman, because he had a relationship with the police, he actually called the police, and they prevented us from making the arrest. You know, but we have charged the guy for obstruction, and the case is right in court. So we can make through observations. We know. We have ways of identifying victims, and so when we see a potential victim, we know. And when we also see that they are in a compromised position, we also know. You know, so that is how we do it. You know.
How many of your cases, of your human trafficking cases, come to you in that way, though, with just observing it on the street? Is that how you pick? Is that how you find most of the cases that you're handling?
No. We get referrals from the police. We get from NSCDC. We didn't get from the army. You know, and so from Nigerian Immigration Service, we also get cases. You know, and so from informants, you know, people come directly and report.
Okay, so
yes,
you've provided the perfect segue for where
yes.
I'm going next. Often, because of where this trafficking is taking place, just simply waiting to see it on the street isn't going to get us the kind of enforcement that we really need to solve the problem. So rather than only taking reactive measures, there was some discussion about this yesterday, in responding when we get a report, when you get a call from the police, when you see a young person, an adult that makes you feel suspicious while you're out and about, we wanted to really think about using proactive measures, because that is where the rubber hits the road in terms of human trafficking investigations. So you have identified that informants is something you use. How do informants work here? Are you able to talk about it generally?
When the calls come in through the call center, the information is now taken to investigators. But I think I expect investigators to contribute here, please. I expect investigators to contribute here. So our call operators in the call center, when they get this information, they now take the information to the investigation department, and investigation department takes it up from there.
Do you ever have situations where you'll have somebody who, let's say, was a former trafficker, who will work with you or work with the police to provide information?
No, I think it's rare. It's rare for a former trafficker to get involved in the investigation.
Right.
It's rare.
Do you have those sorts of relationships with people in other types of crime here in Nigeria? If the police are investigating, let's say, drugs, will they have a relationship with somebody who is selling drugs or who used to sell drugs, who will provide them with information? What do you call that here?
Yeah, it's informal, but the only thing is that as an investigator, you have friends outside, because as I said, if you go on surveillance in a hotel, you get used to some of them, you go there to drink. From there, you elicit information from one of them, and then you ask him to provide some information. And when he or she does that, you bring it back to the office. Because as an investigator, you are tired to get up an informant in any area where you are asked to go for an investigation. That helps you a lot before they can even reach you. Because if you have a personal informant, he contacts you direct before he gets to you, because he wants his identity to be so you always have an investigation. It depends on the model of your own investigation or how you are trained. If you are a good investigator, you must have an informant within the area where you are asked to go for something. And that helps you.
In addition to what he said, there are some endemic areas that you can actually employ someone secretly to work for NAPTIP. You know, all the person does is to source around. You are not going to be there, but the person is there and he goes around looking for information for you. But again, if you get that information, you have to process it to know if the information is correct or not.
Okay, so in terms of confidential informants, that's what we call them in the United States, you guys are already doing that, and it sounds like it's working. So that's an example of a proactive investigation. We've got a few questions. We'll start on the left side and swing around, or comments.
Yeah, I want to add to what they said.
Okay.
Yeah, there are instances where a suspect will volunteer to give us information about other traffickers. Like, okay, so that the suspect can get a soft landing. Maybe we'll probably negotiate to get a bigger trafficker. So the suspect will give us information about those ones, and then we'll probably reduce the offense.
There are other ways you can actually elicit information. Like, I'll give you an example of what I did when I got a report for one of the towns within Abuja, that there was an incident of recruitment of young girls for prostitution. So what I did was I visited the place and I befriended one of them. And luckily, one of them just fell in love with me. And so what I did, I took my time every day. Every time I visit her, we talk. And as time went on, she revealed some information which I now used. So these are the ways. It has to be painstaking. You have to be patient. Sometimes you can even pose as a customer. Yeah. Undercover. Yes. So,
is asked to go out. When you go out, you are on surveillance. At any time you're on duty, you're on surveillance. So most of the cases we get from surveillance and from informants. That's how we get our cases. And again, referrals from our sister agencies like the Nigerian Police, the Nigerian Immigration Service, the National NSCDC, and even the Nigerian Customs. We have other sister agencies that refer cases to, and NGOs. The CSOs, they do a lot. They refer a lot of cases to us, like the World Clef, NACTAL members, and all that.
We'll move on then. Before I move on, actually, does anyone have any questions about the use of any of those methods? Problems that you've encountered using them? Questions about alternative ways to use those proactive methods? Anything that you think would be fruitful to discuss about the use of either undercover operations or confidential informants?
Okay. Even with this, the statistics, you said there was U.S. Department for 2017. No. So the U.S. Department, that's the source. That's the source. But yes, but I was of opinion that this statistics has not gotten, you said 2017, that means from January to December, but that statistics is not really giving the true picture of the statistic for 2017 to December.
It's a U.S. publication. The U.S. State Department in 2017 published an international human trafficking report. So it outlines the state of human trafficking globally and then includes sections for various countries with the status of their human trafficking work and the human trafficking statistics. According to that report, which I did not author, these were the statistics provided by NAPDIP to the U.S. State Department. Okay, but you do raise a really important point. I know there was some discussion yesterday about needing more resources to collect data in order to improve on the way you address human trafficking. I absolutely agree that statistics are important. I'm a huge proponent of data collection. However, you do want to keep in mind that because human trafficking is so underreported, that the statistics are not as accurate as we would like them to be. So you don't want to look at a statistic like, 900 cases of human trafficking and say, oh, California only has 900 cases or has so many cases, because there's two things you want to consider. The first is, like I said, human trafficking is underreported. So if we know about 900, chances are there's 1,100 or 1,200 total, because there's going to be many we don't know about. The other thing is, and this may be something you'll begin to experience here, because you're doing such a great job, is once you really start to make an impact in terms of identification and awareness in the community, you'll notice that your numbers will actually go up first. And it can be a little bit frustrating feeling, because you think you're doing a great job, you're doing investigations, you're arresting people, you're prosecuting people. Why isn't the human trafficking going down? There's more awareness. So at first, very good chance that your numbers are actually going to show more trafficking because you're hearing about it, which is a great thing. So that's just something, as you do more data collection, you want to keep in mind about the numbers. Don't be deterred by them or frustrated by them. At least at first, higher numbers, higher reports of human trafficking may be a sign you're actually doing a great job. Okay, so I'm going the wrong way now. Okay, so we covered that. So who are the victims? I get asked this question all the time. What's the profile of a human trafficking victim? In some ways, the answer is there is not a profile. You know, we see victims of every age. We see victims from the United States, from every other country in the world. We see men, we see women, children, adults, sexuality is not a barrier. We see heterosexual victims, we see homosexual victims, we see transsexual victims. there's, gender, race, national origin, none of that means you're more likely to be a victim or to be less likely to be a victim. It does not discriminate. However, there is one thing that tends to be a common thread among most, if not all, of the victims that we encounter, and I believe it to be the case here as well, and that's a vulnerability. It may not be the same vulnerability in all of your victims, but your victims have something that makes them susceptible to the control of a trafficker, or susceptible to be identified as a trafficker, by a trafficker, as a victim that they should approach. So the things that we normally see are listed right here. Poverty, which again, there was a lot of discussion yesterday about socioeconomic status and the impact that has on human trafficking. For example, my cases involving juvenile trafficking, I typically see young people who grew up either in a home where there was only one parent, and that parent may be working multiple jobs to pay the bills and to put food on the table, or they're children who have no parents and are living in a foster home. And in either case, very often, those children don't have the things that they need, let alone the things that they want. So when a trafficker contacts them, and the trafficker is wearing fancy clothes, and he's posing with another girl, who's their age, who has her nails done, and she's got, the fancy handbag, and she looks really happy. It's easier for that trafficker to lure in the young woman who has a lot of things a lot of needs that are going unmet, than it would be if the trafficker approached a young woman who had everything she needed and had everything she wanted. It wasn't likely to be persuaded by the promise of a better life. So that's the impact of poverty. Immigration status. One of the other things that we see very often in the brothel situation is we'll have visitors from other countries who come to the United States, either to visit family or just to see the United States on a tourist visa. And the tourist visa will be for a short period of time, and they stay after their visa has expired. When you have an expired visa, or when you're visiting the United States as a tourist, you're not able to work. So if these individuals who have overstayed their visa need money, they become vulnerable to traffickers because illegal work is the only type of work that they can do while they're in the country. So that's another way that they become involved, face that. The idea of someone asking us to do something with our bodies that we're not comfortable with. In essence, those individuals have been, we call, groomed to be receptive. I'm going to give you a better life. I'm going to help you to go to college. I'm going to help you to get a job. I'm going to help you to buy or build that house that you saw that you wish you had. And someone offering to provide that support seems better than having no one, which for many of the vulnerable trafficking victims is the alternative. And finally, developmental disabilities. So if somebody who, it's relatively self-explanatory, I recognize, but if somebody has a developmental disability that keeps them from having a thorough understanding of appropriate relationships and appropriate boundaries, that person is vulnerable.
Choice one of them. Peer pressure, pressure from peers, friends, and it's not on the list. So when some of your friends who your mates come home with a lot of money and cash and all that, and you ask them, how did you make it? Say, okay, I made it this way, let me show you the way. There is a madam that introduced me to this, and then because of that, my friend has made it and he has brought home a lot of money. There's this tendency for them to believe and follow. And we have victims who have been lured through that means.
Is that primarily with sex trafficking or with labor trafficking also?
Sex trafficking. No, it doesn't. Yes. Yes.
where girls are convinced by their friends, you know, where girls or boys or kids are convinced by their friends that it's normal, and that's where the peer pressure happens. I don't know if it's more common there or in certain cities in the country. But apparently it's not. You're saying it's not.
I don't know how to call that, whether it's peer pressure, but when you have an issue where in a community somebody sees that this person has gone abroad and came back, built a house for someone and for the parents, and another parents is like, what are you doing here? Your mate has gone abroad and she's able to build house for her parents. So that's another way the girl begins to see that I can go out and do something better for my parents. That's so I don't know, there's a community, I don't know how to put that as peer pressure, because it's even the parents that make you know that you need to do what the other girl has done to help her parents. So it's our parents' pressure. I don't know, it's the peer pressure, I don't know how to call it.
I also like to give you another classic case. Many years ago, NAPTIP secured a conviction in Oka, Anambra State, where a woman was convicted for attempting to traffic her daughter to prostitution in Senegal. So parents can actually be facilitators of trafficking.
When the parents are involved, like in that situation, do you get the sense that parents really understand what's happening to their children, or do they just see the money coming back?
Just the money. The money. The money is it.
Like the ignorance is one of the the reasons, or one of the push factors for that, because the parents just feel they go abroad and they work, the kind of work they don't know. And even some, although some, like some cases, know it's prostitution, but they do not know they are exploited. So for you to do prostitution to them is not a problem. But you know, in trafficking issue, when he has to do that with exploitation, that's where the problem comes in. But for them, they don't know these girls are being exploited. They feel that they can go do sex work and bring back the money.
Okay.
There are some parents that actually know what their daughters are going there to do. And I think I will call that greed. Because some of them go as far as selling their landed properties to sponsor these girls to go there to bring more money.
In addition to, I've had a case where the girl was trafficked outside Nigeria, and when she got there, she called the mother was the person that actually organized everything. And when she got there, the girl didn't know what she was going there to do. When she got there, she called the mother. The mother was like, after all, I used to see you with boys behind my house. What is there? You've been doing it in Nigeria. What stops you from doing it there? You can just start and do the work and get money for me. So most parents, especially mothers, know what the children are going out to do.
And just to add to that, unmanageable family size, unmanageable family size, you know, puts the parents under pressure. Poverty, okay.
Is that the connection?
Family
that they need
history,
more money
okay, poverty, right? Okay.
Yeah. So it sounds like it's financially driven. The families need money either because it's an unmanageable family size or because they're not well employed or.
Poverty, but what we call it, I want to call it an order of birth. The family of, let's say, 8, the first daughter always come out to sacrifice for the rest. Like, because I go out and make money, my other wants to go to school. So we call it an order of birth.
That's something to keep in mind. I know there were some folks in the room who aren't prosecutors or investigators, but do other awareness or outreach work. It sounds like awareness for parents, for families is something that's really important here.
Apart from greed, because some are actually greedy, that if we can give them something to do, because when you say they shouldn't traffic or they shouldn't allow their girls go out for sex work, what do they have to offer these children? And truly, if you go down to the local areas, there's so much poverty. And so like he was saying, a family of 6, 8, 10, and there's nothing for them. So there's the issue of they being empowered themselves have come up several times in NAPTIP just because of the funding. That's empowering the parents to be able to look after, allow them to be trafficked.
Very good. I'm very glad to hear that NAPTIP does a great job.
Okay, I'd just like to add to what they've said, but the truth is that on last Sunday I was in a church to talk to the congregation with some of our staff, and so many.
You know, sometimes it's not poverty, it's not greed, but the trend. You know, the kind of people you meet around, what is in vogue, and you want to jump into it without knowing. So most of the times it's trend. Yes, yes. Some of them, you know, they don't know what they're doing. They just see other people doing. They just want to join the bandwagon. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, my contribution in terms of who are victims, I realize in most cases as a prosecutor, we tend to put the parents on the side of the victim and say, oh, the parent is a victim. But right now things are changing, and if we see clearly that a parent is guilty, because this African society, we say, oh, it's a family thing, you know, that kind of mentality. But now we're beginning to change. If a parent is guilty of being, because some of them are the traffickers that we're looking for, but you know, sometimes we tend to leave them out of it and put them on the victim side. But now things are changing. You know, if a parent is found guilty, so it's a kind of deterrence for them. So while we're doing awareness campaign, if we find any parent wanting, we prosecute you too. So.
Complicit in allowing your child to be trafficked.
Yeah, because what we do, aiding and abetting is also a crime. So if we can catch other people like friends for aiding and abetting, the parents too will fall under this category.
What about a situation like a peer pressure situation where you have one child who's been trafficked, and then that child recruits other children, their friends, to work for the trafficker as well? Do you encounter that often?
Yeah, we have a case presently. A girl was trafficked to Dubai, and she decided, she paid off her debt and decided, I want to go and settle down, have a family. So what she did is to recruit other people, and right now she's in, they just granted them bail. They were in Kuje prison, and the case is ongoing. So she will be charged, and any other person, her sister was involved too. She procured the passports for the victims that finally traveled, so they are all going to be prosecuted.
That's something we've begun to struggle with a lot in the United States, is where you draw that line between victim and trafficker, because very often the victims will recruit other victims.
Yeah, the law is clear. So if you take part, if you facilitate in any way, if you procured passports, we have people in that category. Right. Those who did the passports, those who transported them to the airport, the ones who brought the contact. Like this particular girl was just coming from an all-night meeting, and somebody told her on the road, I can get you want money? And she said, yes, my family is in a bad situation. And from that all-night meeting, she found herself.
What if in that same situation, the initial victim, the girl who you're now charging, was recruiting at the direction of the trafficker? If the trafficker made her recruit additional girls, would that change your analysis?
Yeah, sometimes we use some of them depending on your level of involvement. We use them as like witnesses against the trafficker. So sometimes our target is the madam, so we use this people depending on the level of your involvement. But on this level, she is a trafficker. She has girls in Dubai, at different places.
So it is fact specific. You look at the whole picture.
Yes, and we have a victim, one of her victims who got pregnant and gave birth in our shelter. Yes, so.
Okay, that's good information.
Yes, still on that, in the course of victims profiling, we've had situations where we've discovered some people who were handed over to us as victims. In the course of the discussion, we discovered that they are actually traffickers. So in that case, the story changes now. We have victims turned traffickers. That's one. Then back to your question on what we do to talk to parents concerning the family history and all that. I know at the point of reunion, in the process of our counseling and rehabilitation, reintegration back to the homes, when our counselors go to reunite their victims with their parents, there is always counseling for the parents, which is part of that, to tell them, look, there are alternative sources. You don't have to just keep sending your children on this and other. So it's part of our programs. Thank you. Then also, what he said, when we tell them, when we go to churches and mosques and religious places and open places to do sensitization, we do preventive now. We also tell them, rather than giving birth to the number of children that you cannot cater for, you can, in fact, it's a major part of our public enlightenment programs now that tell them, give birth to keep your number of births to manageable level. So, and it's yielding results. Thank you.
Mine is actually a question. Yes. I want to know what the practice is in your country. Like, do you have age limits to refer to people as victims? Okay, like assuming an adult or woman of 35 years is being trafficked and exploited, and the person is actually very vulnerable. Do you refer to the person as victim? Okay, in your country, that's the practice.
Even without any of the fraud or coercion or duress, because they aren't 18, they can't consent to being in that sexual relationship. So that person, any minor sold for sex, is automatically going to be considered a victim. And with the adults, there's actually been a shift over the last couple of years. So your first example with the trafficking, the fact that a woman is 25 years old doesn't impact the way that we view that individual. They're still a victim. Previously, there was not that mentality taken for a pimping relationship. If a woman was prostituting herself in giving the pimp money, she wasn't necessarily considered a victim. Because there wasn't that fraud or coercion or duress that we look at to characterize a relationship as a trafficking or exploitative relationship. But as we've learned more about trafficking relationships and commercial sex exploitation, that mentality has begun to shift, where even in a pimping relationship where there may not be that force or fraud, we do view the women who are being sold for sex as victims, because we've learned that even if the relationship doesn't rise to the level of trafficking, that there's some level of exploitation involved in the sale of commercial sex when a pimp is involved. Does that answer your question?
Somehow, okay.
I want to make sure I answer. I maybe clarify.
Yeah, somehow. I was just wondering, because to me, my understanding or my view is not like they should place a limit to a vulnerable person or exploited person to be attended to as a victim, I mean, an adult can actually be trafficked and become a victim. The person is vulnerable. All kinds of, all manners of ill treatment is given to the person. And if you are considering the age of the person, you may not attend to the person as a victim, but actually the person is a victim.
Right.
And like in Nigeria, we kind of, we have age limits you
do have an age limit.
Somehow, for a person to be considered as a victim, and to enable the person stay in a shelter, you must be of a certain age.
So you have to be on the younger side. Even if you're an adult, you have to be a young adult to be treated like a victim.
Yes. So I want to know if that is applicable to your country too.
It's not.
Okay.
No, we have different shelters. There'll be shelters that specialize in juveniles. There's certainly an understanding that juveniles require different care and a different approach and separate housing. So they're separate, but they're offered but services are offered for both juveniles and for adults. Right. Sure. Right.
What she's trying to say is that once exploitation is established, the age is...
Right. So it sounds like the issues. It sounds like what I'm hearing is that the issue isn't so much the perception of someone as a victim as it is the availability of services or the availability of resources for really, I'm sure, for all victims, but perhaps more so for older adults.
Yes. For the older adults, like he's trying to explain,
right,
that once exploitation is established,
right,
it's been established that the person has been exploited, then the person is treated as a victim.
Right.
And like she rightly said, we don't put all of them in the same shelter. We try to separate them.
So is the disconnect that you're feeling related to there not being sufficient resources?
If I can clarify, in general, in the United States, the age doesn't matter as far as victimization. Often what we'll do is with juveniles or someone elderly or someone disabled, we consider them more vulnerable victims. So everyone's a victim, but you get more vulnerability, and that's why the age distinction sometimes exists, so you don't have to show fraud, coercion, or duress.
Well,
I just want to share an experience of Lagos. There was a victim that was an HIV/AIDS positive that came in from India. She was 40 years and brought her into the shelter. Although it's for a very brief period because of the risk. So the issue of age can be played down. Exploitation is the aim thing when it comes to taking victims.
70-year-old, a victim, returned victim, in Lagos also. Yes, so, yes. Sex trafficking, 70-year-old. Yes. So, but then the case is not regular. It's not, the frequency is not much. It's higher, with the younger age. That's just it, yes. The younger, yes. Yes. That's it.
In addition to what they are saying, NAPTIP is not fighting prostitution or commercial sex work. What we are fighting is the prostitution of the exploitation of others. So if an adult goes and does prostitution, it's not our business. But if the proceeds are being exploited out, that's what we quarrel about. So NAPTIP is fighting the exploitation of the prostitution of others.
we're off. So next question, logically, is who are the traffickers? We've spent some time covering who are the victims, who are the traffickers. Similar to the way there's no exact profile for a victim, there's really no, in the United States at least, no real profile for the traffickers. It's really anybody who has access. So what does access mean? Access can be we live in the same household. Access can be we work at the same office. Access can be we're Facebook friends, which is what we're seeing a lot of now. So really anybody with access is potentially a trafficker. Immigration, anybody who's facilitating, who has access to a community based on that members of that community's desire to immigrate to another country, and to people who facilitate travel, romantic relationships. In the United States, one of the ways we commonly see young women lured into trafficking relationships is what we call a Romeo pimp. Anybody heard that term before, Romeo pimp? Okay, so we distinguish in the sex trafficking world between Romeo pimp and gorilla pimp. What we call a Romeo pimp is a man who will meet a young woman at a party or at a store or online through Facebook or any other social media and acts like he wants to be her boyfriend. For a couple of weeks, they're going out to nice dinners, and he's buying her gifts, he's taking her to get her hair done, things are feeling really good, and this young woman whose, father isn't in the home, and mother is working 2 jobs, food on the table, is really, she's falling in love with this man who's taking such good care of her and showering her with attention and with gifts. And a few weeks into the relationship, sometimes a few months into the relationship, money's getting really tight. And, the man explains to this young woman who's now been lured in, I'd really love to marry you. I see a life together. Unfortunately, we just don't have enough money right now. How could we possibly fix that situation? Talk about it, and he casually mentions, well, maybe, she could just, meet a few men and earn some money that way. And that way they could move on with their lives. She would be doing it for them. She'd be doing it for their relationship. She would be doing it for their future family. It'll just be a few times. So she says, here's this young woman who now her options are lose what she's had for the first time in her life, the nice things, the romantic relationship, the attention, or have sex with a man for just once or twice to make a little bit of money. So then she does it. Well, they get that money, and as often happens with money, a little bit of money is never enough. So maybe she could just do it a few more times, earn just a little bit more money, and they'll be even closer to being able to move forward with the next part of their lives. One thing leads to the next, and she's now become a trafficking victim. So we see that an awful lot. Gorilla pimp refers to a more violent recruitment method. The situations where somebody is kidnapped, or perhaps there's smuggling involved. We'll see it occasionally, I guess not more than occasionally, in the context of a casino floor, something like that, where there'll be women and they're whisked off the casino floor into a hotel room or into a car and taken someplace else. So that's a distinction. And I mention that because oftentimes, at least historically, those Romeo relationships were overlooked as being trafficking relationships. And they weren't seen as an indicator or as a red flag for trafficking. A parent would say, well, that's just her boyfriend. Or, that a teacher would say, oh, yes, the student in my class has this new boyfriend. It didn't ever occur to anyone that the boyfriend might not, in fact, be a boyfriend. So that's the basics on who the traffickers are. Does that resonate with folks here? Do you see these sorts of relationships or sources of trafficking relationships in Nigeria? Yeah? Same. Okay, I was going to ask, what am I missing? But it sounds like we pretty much covered it. All right, off to a good start. Okay, So indicators of human trafficking. General, this is often applies to both labor trafficking and sex trafficking. So monitor or controlled communication. We're talking about cell phones, not being able to have a cell phone, not being able to use even a regular phone, not being able to talk to anyone, family or friends are being cut off, the person is being isolated. That isolation is part of the control. Oftentimes we'll also see somebody who isn't allowed to speak for themselves but is spoken for by a third party. I don't know if you saw this, the news coverage of this story here, but during the Super Bowl in the United States several years ago, a couple of years ago, a flight attendant on an airplane was actually discovered a case of human trafficking on the airplane that she was servicing. There was a young woman traveling with an older man, and the flight attendant realized that every time she would walk up and down the aisle and say, you know, would you like a drink? Would you like water, peanuts, or pretzels? The girl wouldn't say anything, and the man sitting next to her would say, she'll have peanuts, or she'll have a soda. And the flight attendant just found it to be really odd that for such a simple question, the girl wouldn't answer. Not, you know, it wasn't a situation where it was a question about, you know, where anything that a parent would have to answer for the child, for example. The flight attendant also noticed that when the girl got up to go to the bathroom, the man also went to the bathroom. And she just got a bad feeling, this flight attendant. And sure enough, she reported it, and it was in fact what she thought it was. This young lady was being trafficked, she was being flown, I don't recall from where, but to the Super Bowl, to then be trafficked to men who were there at the Super Bowl. So that's an example of, you know, third-party communication. Confusion regarding time or location. See this often because the traffickers don't have any set schedule, no regimen. They're not in control of their own time. They're not going to school. They're not going to work. Often they're not allowed to sleep. So they have no sense of what time it is or where they have been and when they were there. So sometimes asking simple questions that can't be answered will alert you to the fact that you may have a trafficking situation. Fearful of law enforcement. This can sometimes be simply because folks don't like law enforcement, at least in the United States. There's a culture often of being a fear of law enforcement. You see the sirens behind you when you're driving, and even if you're not doing anything wrong, you immediately get nervous. But it could also be because they have been trained by their trafficker to be afraid of law enforcement. They're told all the terrible things that will happen to them if law enforcement ever gets involved. The lack of control over personal documents, finances, or movement. You know, personal documents can be all sorts of things. Most commonly, we see the passport, right? But it can be other documents too. It could be work documents. It could be a birth certificate. It could be, you know, information about where you live. It could be a bus pass. It could be all sorts of personal documents. It's finances. Like we were hearing about yesterday in the context of an agent, where you don't actually get paid for the work yourself. Somebody else is controlling your money. And lack of control over movement. So similar to the example on the plane where the girl wasn't allowed to go to the bathroom by herself, you'll see that also outside of an airplane. I actually was at a clothing store just a couple of weeks ago in Los Angeles, and I noticed a younger girl wearing very little clothing with an older man, and they were in the lingerie section together. And every time she moved to a new rack of lingerie, he was right behind her. And I got that same, you know, feeling that something was wrong. I don't know the outcome of it at this point, but it's another example where you'll see a controlled movement or prohibited movement. Of course, you could also have the restraint scenario as well, where someone's movement is not just controlled but completely prohibited. In signs of abuse, like the burns that we were talking about yesterday, or branding, things of that nature. Are these generally the indicators of human trafficking that you would see here? Yes, of course.
There was one spectacular case where all these indicators were not does not apply. If a friend of mine told me what happened to a woman, a Cameroonian, a woman who met her friend or would-be husband on Facebook. So they got to, they started communicating, and then afterwards, he now flew into, he's a Frenchman, he now flew into Yaoundé. They had a lavish wedding and all that, and then he took her back to France. And that was when the problem started. Back in France, first of all, he stopped her from communicating, locked her in an apartment, and then had men pay money into his account and they have sex with her. So sometimes these indicators might not really be applicable. Thank you.
When you say finances, so we're talking about finances, so sometimes it may be not necessarily lack of control over it, but somebody who has more money than they ordinarily would.
I would just like to add to this, where you find lots of young men and women, youths, traveling together with maybe one or two other person, and maybe they have footstep on them and they don't really know where they are going to. If you ask any one of them, they might just say, we're going somewhere, or give you conflicting destinations. You just might be able to tell that that's a trafficking case as well. I don't see it there, so I thought maybe we could add that to that.
Yeah, I have a few other slides on the youth-specific, minor-specific indicators, and that's definitely one of them. We often see it in the case of like traveling sales crews. Do you have that here? Somebody will hire a bunch of young people to sell candy or to sell wrapping paper or things like that. Yeah. They drive them around and they drop them off in certain places. That's one of the places we most commonly see labor trafficking of minors in the United States. So I want to take a little pause from making you listen to me and take a look at this. All right, can everyone read this well enough from where they're sitting? Okay. Take a few seconds, a few minutes maybe, and read this, and then we'll chat about it. Sorry, standing right in your way. Great, everyone had a chance to read through it? Trafficking, yes or no? Yes? How many, raise your hand if you think it is trafficking. I'm only seeing a few hands, so most people think it's not trafficking? It is trafficking. Okay, you think it's not. Tell us why you think it's not
This is what we call smuggling of migrants, SOM, because the victim asks somebody to cross, and the victim actually paid to be crossed. It was an arrangement. So when the victim got to the other side, the victim was not exploited. The victim was kept so that the money, the agreement for that crossing to be paid. So this is smuggling of migrants, not TIP.
Sorry, it's trafficking because there's infringement of rights there, right to freedom. She has been locked up in a room and then passport has been seized.
There are so many elements of trafficking involved there. Her movement was restricted when she got there, even though she says she wasn't raped. But her movement was restricted. The passport, the documents, she didn't have access to the documents, and then she would have to pay additional money, so there is financial imperative aspect to it. It might have started as smuggling because of the help that was given to her by, supporters, but then it now ended as trafficking actually because of the exploitation. She was abused, she was exploited.
For me,
she was abused, locking up. She wasn't sexually abused, but she was abused. She was exploited.
For me,
sexually abused, exploited, but there was abuse psychologically. Locking someone up in a confinement amounts to abuse. His right to movement was violated. His right to movement, her right to freedom was violated. So
and for me again, the issue of being a minor too comes into play for me. And sometimes you tell them as a minor there are things they don't understand. So for me that comes into play. It's trafficking. It is trafficking. And the part where the person wasn't raped, just putting that child in that circumstances. For example, if you're taking someone to be if you're trafficking in the process of transporting someone from one place to another, even if the act didn't happen itself, it is a crime. So that for me is, so even being put under, subjected to that condition alone, other people were raped, I was not raped, just the emotional and psychological trauma, and considering it's a minor for me, it also comes into play in addition.
To me, it's not trafficking because you can't prove exploitation in this case, either sexually or labor exploitation. So if you go to court, you have the act, you have the means, but you don't have the purpose. I don't think you'll be able to.
In doing the gardening and all of the housework.
Yes, that would amount to labor exploitation.
Okay,
but
so then you would have a labor trafficking situation.
Yes. So this.
In my own contribution, this person is a minor. He's just 16 years. She went to somebody on her own that she wants to travel. That is an economic migrant. Number two, she went to somebody who already, she know that this person can take her there. That one is a smuggler. When she now crossed over to the other side, her passport was seized, which is one of the elements of human trafficking there. And at a point, You know, the control measure in human trafficking is rape, is one of it. Rape. Coercion. Seizure of passport. That is other element of, to control the victim. And at a point, there was a demand to pay ransom for her to be freed. So I suggest, I'm suggesting it is human trafficking. Smuggling translates to human trafficking.
Hello. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
From the gist of the case, or about what is written here, the girl went to somebody, paid some money by herself, and the balance will be paid up at the destination point. So when she got there, I think the reason why they kept her in that room is because that balance has not been paid. And she was not raped. The passport you're talking about, they had to hold up something as a collateral so that she would not disappear. But, they, you know, in order, if you check it by the age again, you may say there are some elements of human trafficking, but it's very hard to prove because she's conscious of what was going on, irrespective of the age you are talking about. Thank you.
False imprisonment charge. I have an extortion charge. Maybe we can get to human trafficking, but we would start the case with false imprisonment, extortion, maybe conduct further investigation, and if the circumstances change, for example, as Amanda pointed out now, if this person is put to work in the home and cook, clean, provide services, then at that point we could have human trafficking, but we see how we can evolve, and if we charge these other crimes as well, we can at least get a conviction on those two and maybe continue forward with more convictions.
Being trafficked. So it didn't occur to her to say, yes, they also make me clean the bathrooms and clean the kitchen and cook and care for the children, because maybe to her, that's what she did in her own home, so it seemed normal, or, you know, for whatever other reason, it wasn't top of mind compared to her, for her, compared to the other things, that wasn't important. So as investigators, you've got to take it upon yourself to make sure you ask the right questions, because asking the right questions could take this from a smuggling to a human trafficking, when all you've done is ask one additional question. Did you do any housework? Did you have, you know, sex? She mentions that the men in the house were raping women. Did somebody ask her whether anybody had sex with men outside the house? We don't know in this scenario, but that would be something else you'd want to make sure you asked if you were the investigator in this case, because that's another question that might take you from the crimes that we mentioned to the human trafficking that may very well be the goal, the crime we're trying to prove. Let's do one more.
considering there is supposedly a contract, are we considering the fact that she's a minor? Can she go into a legally binding contract?
In the United States, technically, a minor could not enter a contract. Her parents, for example, could have entered a contract to, her parents could enter a contract on her behalf. Whether they could enter a contract to send her, to have her smuggled into another country is a different discussion. But no, in the United States, a minor cannot enter a contract. Right. Right, if folks had enough time to read the scenario. Okay, what about this one? Show of hands if you think this is human trafficking. Show of hands. Who thinks it's human trafficking? No hands again. All right, who wants to tell me why it's not human trafficking? You do. All right.
From our home context is child labor. One, some of the elements that is available is the girl, she's working in a restaurant and she rarely go to school. And she is a minor, she's 9 years of age. And the work that they gave her to do, when you look at it, it is beyond her physical ability. So we categorize such an offense under child labor in our country.
Is there anyone who feels differently, who disagrees with that opinion? No, everyone feels this would be child labor. What about what other questions would you want to ask this child to find out whether maybe it's more than just child labor?
She's living with adopted parents. Like in Nigeria, we have this aunties, uncles that you foster, like a foster parenthood thing, where you go take them from the village and they are with you. And so if one question I'll be asking is, are these, okay, the adoptive parents, where did you come from? Where are your real parents? Are they still alive or not? But those will give me an indication whether she was moved from a village or from another home to another home to do that work, which will now, the aspect of transportation will now come in. That gives me some elements of trafficking.
Okay.
I would also like to ask the girl how much, or if she's paid being kept here, and how much she's paid, and then who collects the pay,
okay,
and then what relationship exists between the adoptive parents, as in what even led to her coming, how did she come to this place, and all that.
Okay. Anybody else who have a question that they would want to ask this child before deciding what crimes they have? What do we know about? Yes, you've got one. Sometimes. Okay. Right. What's causing her to do the work, right? Okay. What else? The other thing I might want to know here is what are the living conditions she's in? Does she have, a lovely big king-size bed with a fluffy pillow and fluffy comforter, or is she living on a mat on the basement floor? Why would that matter? What happens if she's on the mat on the basement floor and the door is locked? Right, well then we maybe have the restraint, the physical restraint that would tell us.
or they have refused her to go to school. Why she misses those days of not going to school. Those can also give me.
There are other questions. Okay. Yeah, you could ask if the adoptive parents are over fond of her. Like, does it come to you in the night? Does it do things you don't expect a dad to do to you? That kind of thing. So it could be, the girl could be sexually abused once in a while. You never know if you don't ask that question.
Mine is the little contribution, because the child is under the age of 12 years old, and under law section 23 of our law, she's under the age of 23, like here she's 9 years old. As long as she's under that age and she's staying, even if it is her parents, she's here we're told that sometimes she goes to school and then stop at a time. The fact that she's not going to school is an offense. It's an offense under the law. So it is not for us to begin to ask whether the child is treated well or not treated well. The child is expected to be in school at this age. So it's an offense under the law. Yes. 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 Yes, he can be charged under section 23 of our law. He can be charged. It's an offense.
Domestic.
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
We've almost answered it, because what I was saying is trafficking is that said when she's not working at the restaurant, she's cleaning at the adoptive parents. That means money must even have exchanged hand between different people. No, look at it there. You say when she's not working at the restaurant, she's working. That means there are two parties involved.
All right. We are running a little bit over, and I love that we're having such great discussions, but I do want to be respectful of everybody's time also. So let me run down and just cover a few other things. So we covered the general indicators of human trafficking. Now that we've had a chance to talk about some of the scenarios, I want to circle back around to some of the indicators that we were looking for, many of those that you all identified in the different cases, domestic workers and child labor. So domestic workers, where is the person sleeping? You know, like I said, is it a comfortable bedroom, or is it the way we would treat somebody who is a slave? Undefined scope of work. So let's say you've got somebody who's helping you, a house help, and that person should know what the expectations are of their work, right? So this person's job is to cook or to clean, or to cook and to clean. And that's okay. You're paying them to do a finite job the same way we're all paid to do a specific job. What you want to watch out for is a situation where someone does everything on an ad hoc basis. Anything that's needed in the house at any time, that person does for the same amount of money. So let's say today they're working 8 hours and they get, $20. That would not be enough, but let's say just for the ease of numbers. And then tomorrow they have to work 20 hours for the same $20. And there's this undefined scope of work in terms of the amount of work that's being done and the type of work is being done. Doesn't necessarily mean it's trafficking, but it's something you would want to see as a red flag and ask more questions. No days off. Of course, somebody who isn't allowed to leave the house. Sometimes those go hand in hand with one another. But there may be, we often see exclusions for taking kids to school or religious services. and find that despite those exclusions, there is still a trafficking relationship there. And is there anything not listed here that you all see in the cases of labor trafficking in the domestic context, in house help?
In Nigeria, most house helps don't have working hours. They just work forever, as in 24 hours of the day. They can be called upon at any time. Then secondly, they abuse them physically. They beat them up and put bruises on them.
And you don't consider that human trafficking, labor trafficking?
It's labor trafficking.
Right.
Yes.
So, but it sounds like that's a common occurrence here.
It's very common.
So how does NAPTIP handle that? Do you still prosecute everybody who you know is doing it?
Yes, we do.
That's why you guys are all so busy, huh? I've got one more slide.
Some of the indicators we watch at to know some of those house girl is they look very unkempt. Their hairdo is rough, and they have bruises all over their body. So these are some of the things that you know. When you see the children of the family,
right.
the house girl look quite different from the children. Very dirty and
not treated the same as
they're not treated. Yeah. They're not treated.
So it sounds like these things are familiar to all of you, things that you commonly see. All right. And then just really quickly, I want to run through these. I'm keeping everyone from their coffee break, so I suspect I'm very quickly becoming the least favorite person in the room. Specific to potential victims when you have youth, these are things you might want to look for. In sex trafficking cases, the first item up there is what somebody in this corner mentioned earlier about finances, having nice things all of a sudden. You can see it with adults also, but it's we definitely are looking out for it with children. Suddenly kids are going on shopping trips, or they show up to school with new fancy outfits. We want to know where those are coming from, if it's unusual for that family, or it's unusual based on that child's history. Visits to websites, children who have access to the internet, we want to be careful to look at what kind of website they're frequenting. That often, the onus is going to be on the parents. I know we discussed that sometimes parents are part of the problem, but part of our awareness with parents should be keeping an eye on what your kids are doing on the internet. Signs of branding or burn marks, and then changes in dress, social circle, or romantic relationships. Like I said before, the idea of a Romeo pimp, this change in a romantic relationship, may not be, a positive, genuine romantic relationship. We want to look at that relationship if we have any of the other vulnerability factors to make sure that it's a healthy relationship for that young person and not a part of grooming for sex trafficking. And also, if it's associated with changes in dress, all of a sudden, we talked about peer pressure, all of a sudden this child has a whole new group of friends. Well, it's because that whole group of friends was, part of a trafficking situation and has recruited that child. And then labor trafficking with youth. Truancy or working during school hours, which is what we saw in that scenario, the restaurant. The door-to-door sales. And a child who's giving another adult the money for their work, or in the reverse, the adult is being paid directly for the child's work. In the United States, many children have cell phones. So I put this up there. I don't know if it applies here now, but it probably will at some point in the future. The traffickers will take the cell phones from the child so that they can control the communication. This is also true of adults, adult victims. So that's something, if a child, as an adult, as a parent, you've bought your child a cell phone, now all of a sudden they've lost the cell phone. And then you replace the cell phone, and now the cell phone's become lost a second time. You may want to ask some questions about where that cell phone keeps going. And then injuries consistent with manual labor, which somebody over here just mentioned. that the child presents differently. It could be injuries, it could be dirty, soiled clothing, anything that's consistent with a child who's doing manual labor, work that perhaps is too difficult for a child. All right, that's it. I had one more scenario, but we can do it. Yeah. I sure can.
Sounds of tattoo, branding of tattoo. I thought it's a fact among the.
You thought it was what?
I thought it's acceptable in American society.
Okay.
Tattoos.
So, branding and tattoos. Is branding familiar to you? Do you know what branding is? Okay. So often in the United States, I'm glad you asked this question. A trafficker will brand using like a hot either a needle or a hot piece of metal, their initials or some sort of symbol on the trafficking victim, so that other traffickers know that that's their victim. Yeah. So, what do you call it? Trademark. Yes. Okay. Same thing. And it's the same thing with tattoos. Tattoos are generally acceptable. Many people have tattoos, but in this situation, it would be specifically a tattoo, either the person's name or in the context of like a street gang, organized crime, they'll have a symbol, a trademark, so the tattoo of that will be on the victim. All right, so here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna put this up here, the last scenario. Read it at your leisure. Are we ready for a break? I'm assuming we are. Okay, so it's coffee break time. So get your coffee, take a minute and read this scenario either before or after or with your coffee, however you want to do it. When we get back, we'll talk about this scenario and then move on to the next. Oh no, you're right. I don't have the third one. All right, I made a mistake. You guys are all come up. Enjoy your coffee break.
Thank you. So we're having a coffee break now. So we go outside and take our coffee and our snack, and we are coming back in the next 30 minutes. Please, 30 minutes. We want to leave here early so that we can come in tomorrow early.